My name is Tom Proost, and I was production designer on Mermaids on Mars. Film I got into by just doing commercials and building sets early on, just small things. I'm not sure if everyone remembers this, the crackers sliding down the peanut butter mountain or the cheese mountain, but we did all of those spots, and I was a part of those over at Colossal Pictures in the 80s. And when Tim decided he wanted to put Nightmare Before Christmas together, and he always had seen that as being a stop motion film, on that job I was the set construction foreman. So I think we did 200 sets, and after that move on and do James and the Giant Peach, where I also did the set construction foreman on that. And there we had fewer sets because of the live action stuff, but we had a lot of peaches. After that, it seemed natural to move over to Industrial Light and Magic at that point, where they were still doing a lot of the stop-mo and had moved on to the new Star Wars trilogy. But it wasn't until the gang in Leica up in Portland, and they brought Henry in, and then Henry brought a lot of us old-timers back too to do Coraline, and that one I ended up art directing on. Some of the biggest inspiration of Mermaids on Mars was probably, well, first of all, the book that Nancy came up with, because it was her storyline. Georges Méliès, the guy who did Voyage to the Moon, and some of the other flat artwork that we see in various movies. When we first talked about doing it, and we had our breakdown meetings as far as the film went and looking at the initial script, I really did go off of the idea of a proscenium arch and trying to put everything in a theatrical setting, including like a raked stage, just to create the perspective, and then having these different layers. When we shot it, this obviously became problematic, partly because of the amount of time it would take to do each shot and set up, having to have multiples and so on, as well as trying to get in there, light it, and get an animator in there. There was a few shots where we were able to get away with that, but most of the time we had to shoot the artwork as flats, as an element against green screen, and then they were all composited later in the various layers, and then with the help of some software to give them some depth and make them more dimensional in the composite process. I knew I needed to do a lot of trompe l'oeil in this. Whenever you do this kind of flat artwork, you still need to give it some dimension, some, feel like there is some space there. So you have to paint in the shadows and so on. So we looked into getting some of the local talent. Lauren Abrams, really good scenic painter and specifically very good at doing that. And then Dan and Neil, two really good model makers to help build the sets. Dan, you can see some of his work in back of me, and Neil as well, was enough, and it was about what we could afford on the budget. Because of the budget and having to put so much of it as comped elements, having to put so much on green screen, and just relying so much on post-production, you always want to try to get as much as you can in the camera, so you own it right then and there, instead of having to rely that all these other people later on will see the vision that you had early on and be able to, put that also into their composites. That was probably one of the most challenging things, just to make sure that hoping that it would end up the way that we wanted it to go, as if you were going to shoot it all practically. We looked at various techniques of doing flat waves, theatrical, that have been done, in the theater through the years. The idea of making it very theatrical, taking the waves and putting them in layers again, up a rake set, and then moving them all randomly. That was something we weren't sure if it was going to work, because this was all hand puppeted, and it was something that I certainly wanted to go for. I wanted to do as much of that as possible in the movie, try to do the hand puppetry and try to once again do it all practically. We weren't sure if that would work, though, if things would have to be motorized or done more stop motion. But I think we had 13 layers of waves, and they were on a 5-degree rake. And we had, I don't know, maybe 10 people, 2 people on each wave, one on each end, and they would slide it back and forth in these slots. And with the direction of John, we were able to, having various speeds, probably going a little bit faster in the foreground, a little bit slower in the background, really to create the effect that seemed to work very well, and hopefully I don't think had to be changed too much in post. The portal was a device in the movie where we see Julian fall into the water, and he's going to be transformed or taken to Mars. Eventually we ended up using a little playhouse tube and just spinning that and giving it some different light techniques, as well as a little help from the post-production people. Dan Hout was the one who built the siphonator. The design went through a lot of process too. We needed this large machine, mechanical device that was going to puncture through the surface of Mars and drain all the water. And it needed to really feel massive. Glaucus, the little Martian guy, was going to be the one who ran this machine, and he was kind of a comical character, and we wanted that humor between the machine and this little diminutive guy. But I really allowed Dan to just go ahead with it, because a lot of this stuff, we call it kit bashing, where you just take various elements and you start combining them and they start taking on their own presence just by the materials that you pick. So he'd take some treads and some PVC pipe and some other materials, and as he started combining 5-gallon buckets or whatever, and you'd starting to create a shape. Scale is always based on the characters, and sometimes it's really difficult because a lot of the characters aren't really based on humans. I mean, they're all kind of caricatures or cartoons. So you have to kind of figure out, well, you look at the story and see how do they interact within the sets and the environments. I mean, do they have to go through doors? Are they against standing near a window? But scale is you try to find something that generally is a ballpark figure to most things. Pretty much the stop motion place right now in the Bay Area is Athena Studios. They're the ones who are still, holding the torch for stop mo and trying to keep it alive.